is Bishop Tom Dowd. I'm the diocesan bishop for the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, and I'm also the bishop promoter for Stella Maris, which otherwise was known as the Apostleship of the Sea, a Catholic ministry to seafarers. Ministry to seafarers, well, what's a seafarer, first of all? Those are the people of the sea who journey on ships carrying goods and people from one nation to another. And people don't always realize, because sometimes it's sort of an invisible reality, but there are tens of thousands of people on the waters at any given time. And this is a group of people whose pastoral care can't be provided by your typical parish or your typical diocesan structure. And so the Catholic Church wants to make sure that people who have this very important but very challenging profession, that they are cared for as well, they and their families. And so we try and be present to them through chaplaincy services and other services. Sea blindness, which we're referring to, is sort of the idea that we benefit from the work of seafarers, but we don't always realize the importance of seafarers. And so do we always realize when we go to the grocery store, for example, and we find avocados? We don't grow that many avocados in Canada. They must have gotten here somehow. Are we conscious that this is thanks to the work of so many people, men and women, who are able to bring goods and also to help the Canadian economy to grow by bringing our goods elsewhere? So there's an awareness that needs to be built and an appreciation. One of the important elements of certainly Catholic spirituality is gratitude. I mean, the word Eucharist means thanksgiving. And so the Apostleship of the Sea, Stella Maris, its function is not just to look after seafarers, it's also to help deal with this sea blindness, or perhaps to, maybe we don't call it blindness, we consider it expanding the heart for an ever-increasing gratitude for the work of others. So awareness raising is extremely important, as well as direct charitable services to those who work in this field. Well, you raised the point, what if someone wants to get into this ministry? Perhaps there are people who will hear this interview who are curious about it, first of all. They just want to know more. And one of the things we found for people who get involved in ministry to seafarers is that they often don't know much about it initially, but then they discover this hidden treasure, this amazing work of so many people, and to be able to discover that and get into that, they become part of a family of ministry. So I would encourage anybody who is curious to learn more. We have many, many ports in Canada, many, many dioceses that have ports. And so if you're interested, certainly speak to your diocesan bishop and express that interest. If you're in an area, obviously, that has a port. If you're in a landlocked area, seafarer ministry might require you to move to them. But if you're in an area with a port, speak to your diocesan bishop, because as a diocesan bishop, having someone come to me saying, I'm interested in knowing more about this very specific ministry, this very special ministry, is great, because then I know that one of the resources we look for is not just intellectual resources, but resources of the heart, a willingness and a desire to serve. So your expression of that to your diocesan bishop would be most helpful. A bishop promoter is a bishop who is appointed by the Episcopal Conference. So we have one in Canada, for example. There's one in the United States. Each Episcopal Conference, obviously, if it's an Episcopal Conference of a country with ports, will have a bishop promoter. And this is something that is asked for by the Holy See. There was actually a document many years ago produced by St. John Paul II, in which he asked each Episcopal Conference of countries with ports to have a bishop promoter. And so our job is to act internally in the conference to overcome the sea blindness that we spoke about earlier, to help raise awareness of this ministry. It's actually Vatican II that said that care for seafarers is part of the responsibility of a bishop. It's in the documents of Vatican II, black and white. And so John Paul II put out this other document called Stella Maris, in which he tried to take that from being simply a desire and give it some structure. And so the bishop promoter role is one of the things that was created. When I have a chance to speak with chaplains, and I will admit it's been more difficult because of the pandemic, because of COVID, but when I have the chance to interact with chaplains, first of all, the joy of their ministry, the fact that they are aware they're doing something very special. I'd say one of the big challenges is they can sometimes feel a bit alone in their ministry. Again, because it is a special ministry, there aren't necessarily a lot of people within their diocese with whom they can share the work that they're doing. And because of that sometimes lack of awareness, they can wonder, do people really realize what's going on and the beauty of it? So when those chaplains get together, we would have meetings of the chaplains together. There's a real spirit in the group of sharing that ministry, of interacting with one another, of just finding themselves with colleagues. It's part of the beautiful element of this ministry. There are so many conferences and congresses in order to support chaplains, gather them, give them training. So nobody does this alone. You're part of a vast network that actually crosses the entire world. It's one of those ministries, actually, that truly is international. The reason it's headquartered, for example, for the Catholic Church in Rome is precisely because normally we work on territories, a diocese, for example. But if you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean, who's your bishop? Well, if you don't have a local one, then your bishop is the Holy Father. And so Rome, with the universal ministry, supports it, and we're able to create that vast international network. Well, the getting your hands dirty, the ministry of presence, frankly, aligns very well with the vision of Pope Francis, who basically has encouraged priests and other ministers of the church to make sure they get out into what he calls the peripheries. I can tell you the middle of the Atlantic or the middle of the Pacific, that's a periphery. Now, I'm not saying that the chaplain gets on the boat and goes to the middle of the ocean, but the people who live that way, sometimes for weeks, for months on end, that's a periphery. And so by being close to them, you have to start ministry by showing up. And there's a lot of power to just showing up. There's a lot of really beautiful pastoral encounter. Jesus is there on the ship in the middle of the ocean. It's to help the seafarers encounter Jesus on the ship in the middle of the ocean, or at least give them the tools so that when they're there, they're able to have that encounter. And so the ministry of loving your neighbor is universal, and it's not something, we can't say, well, we're going to do the sacraments here and we're going to love our neighbor there. It's all united together in one concept. Sure. Well, the Ad Hoc Committee is, in some ways, another step on a journey. I've spoken about the need for this network, the need for ongoing mutual support. The Stella Maris ministry, the Apostleship of the Sea, is organized very differently in different countries, and Canada is a maritime nation. And so the idea was for the bishops, as a bishops' conference, to be able to reflect on this ministry and ask ourselves, what are the needs, and how are we going to organize ourselves to help meet those needs? And I'm the bishop promoter. Theoretically, I could have sat in my office and tried to come up with it myself, but the bishops are meant to work collegially together as one body in order to arrive at solutions and look at pastoral issues. And so the Ad Hoc Committee's job, it's appointed by the conference. I wasn't the head of the committee. There was another bishop who was the head of the committee. The idea was for this small group to look at the issues and propose solutions, even just small things, but ones that will build a new consensus and perhaps alleviate sea blindness even among the bishops. The See, Judge, Act structure actually is a very famous paradigm for discernment that comes from a movement called Catholic Action, which actually had a great importance here in Canada for many, many years. And so it's actually a pretty straightforward approach. You have to take a look at what's really going on, and you don't just look at the surface. The idea is to do an in-depth analysis. Then you judge, in other words, to kind of decide how you're going to approach it. Judge, we might nowadays call plan. So you plan for what comes next. So you get a look at your environment, you plan for how you think you can intervene, and then you act by giving yourselves the tools and moving forward. So the purpose of the committee was really to do the C part. Then it's up to the bishops' conference to judge. We can propose actions and ideas, and the idea is for the Bishops' Conference to then say, well, here are the things that we accept, and here are the things we authorize you to go back and begin to get started. And then with that, we can hopefully give ourselves the tools to really become a fully fledged ministry, not just a few people who meet once or twice a year, but one body moving forward as Stella Maris. The report, I think, is extremely important because it's so thorough, and it's the kind of report that, first of all, we'll be able to refer back to for quite some time. For example, there's a list of ports in Canada. Now, this or that port might close or a new one might open, but the bulk of that is probably going to be valid for quite some time. There's also a lot of awareness raising in that report, so we can use it as a training tool, for example, for any new bishops who get appointed to a diocese that has ports. It becomes part of them learning this aspect of their ministry. So the report is very important, and what I hope we'll take away from that, again, is this awareness raising and some of the more detailed elements to help plan those next steps. The actual meeting itself, I'm hoping, will be a moment for the episcopate to come together and say, okay, we've looked at this is serious business, and we want to work together to solve it, and hopefully get some, at the very least, some authorizations to be able to move forward and start to develop the infrastructure we need for an even more vigorous ministry.